I'm back, and I'm better than ever. Got a knack
Geek Truth 64. Hey, you are back.
things better. Cause you're
Hi guys, Geek64 here. Today we're talking about a documentary titled Attack of the Doc, appropriately named because it is a documentary on Attack of the Show, as well as G4 in general, but mainly focusing on Attack of the Show. And for those of you who remember G4 fondly, I think this documentary is definitely for you. It's a very positive documentary. It's retrospective style in that it really just looks back fondly on G4 and Attack of the Show. It's not necessarily supposed to be informative. It's just supposed to be more like a retrospective. Now, I do think that there is an underlying idea behind this documentary, but most part is really just looking back at Attack of the Show and G4 and where geek culture was at that time, because G4 was around at a time as geek culture was evolving and becoming more mainstream, and with that came some other issues which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I think that's kind of the feeling of what this documentary is supposed to evoke without actually outright saying it. And this doc is directed by Gore, who you may remember as the DVD guy on Attack of the Show.
Welcome back, film expert Gore.
Thanks.
I worked at Blockbuster when Attack of the Show was on. When I would watch it, I always liked his DVD sections. Obviously, I collect physical media to this day and talk about it on this channel all the time because I like physical media. So definitely his DVD section segment on Attack of the Show was something I always enjoyed. And if you remember him as well, he also has a channel here, Film Threat. And I'll link that below if you're interested in checking it out. Full disclosure, I've been subscribed to Film Threat for many years, so I think maybe I'm partially biased towards this documentary. Honestly, without being a subscriber to Film Threat, I don't know if I would have known about this documentary, and that's part of the reason why I want to do this video, to kind of spread the news that this documentary is out there. You can buy it on Amazon. I believe you can buy it on YouTube as well, or you can rent it on Amazon. You can rent it for $2.99, or you can buy the digital copy for $9.99 on Amazon, which is what I did. Physical media is on the way, so if you want that Blu-ray, I think they're shooting for an August release of this documentary. But let's go ahead and jump into kind of my thoughts and my review on of Attack of the Doc. Basically, the way this documentary is set up, there's three main sections. There's the launch, the rise, and the fall, all appropriately named. So even though I said that this documentary isn't really meant to be necessarily informative, it's more retrospective, there are lots of things in this documentary that I did not remember at all, or that I did not know at all. So for instance, when G4 launched in 2002, for the first week, for 7 days, they just had Pong playing. You imagine flipping through the channels back in the day and just coming across Pong playing? I guarantee you're going to pause for a second. I thought that was pretty interesting. And in this documentary, there's obviously a lot of archival footage. So if that's what you're looking for, if you just want to see some old footage of Attack of the Show, this is definitely the best compilation that you're going to get. There's also some stuff behind the scenes as well, behind the scenes footage. And any footage that they didn't have while they were talking, they kind of filled in those stories by using some game engine, maybe like the Unreal Engine or something like that. I don't really know what software they were using, but that worked, I think, well enough. And the whole documentary is done through voiceover as well. So there's no talking heads. There's no camera crews sitting down with the people. And that's kind of a double-edged sword. I think that there's some positives to that as well as some negatives. But again, because it doesn't cut to any talking heads, you're getting like basically archival footage throughout this entire documentary. So if you like that, that's what you're going to get. And as I said before, this documentary mainly focuses on Attack of the Show. So it really talks about Kevin Pereira, where he started, how he got on Attack of the Show, and then when Olivia Munn started. So that's pretty interesting. They also talk about some of their infamous, things they did they did on the show as well. The Cholula shot incident, which I remember being referenced. I didn't actually watch that episode though. The pie jump, which I did remember from back in the day, and as well as Olivia Munn's McHammer flub. She was reading a teleprompter, and instead of reading it MC Hammer, she said McHammer. And Kevin totally trolls her on this, and they make a big joke about it by later on bringing Kel from Kenan and Kel Mitchell.
Who loves orange soda? Kel loves orange soda.
On to play a McDonald's MC Hammer character. So they knew they knew the flub, they accepted it, and then they trolled themselves. And then when we move into chapter 2, which is the rise, Chris Gore's kind of explaining to one of the producers of Attack of the Show what Comic-Con is, and you have to kind of put it into context. Comic-Con was not mainstream at the time. Geek culture was really on the cusp of becoming mainstream, but it wasn't really there yet. So when you heard Comic-Con, the producer thought it was about comedians, a convention for comedians. What's really interesting is that G4 was the first, channel, the first company for San Diego Comic-Con to let in the doors and start doing coverage at San Diego Comic-Con, because that was really like a mystical thing. At least it was for me. Like, really, conventions in general, like, you got to remember, the internet really was still fairly early. YouTube was fairly early. So seeing footage at conventions was new. It was crazy. So I actually have a VHS recording of G4's coverage of San Diego Comic-Con in 2006. I have a VHS. Now I have converted it to digital. The quality is terrible, but I'll just show you guys a little tidbit that opened this up.
For the first time ever, one network is bringing it to you live, before your eyes, in real time, as it happens. This is Comic-Con, and only G4 brings it to you totally live. G4 and Attack of the Show present Comic-Con 06 Live.
Just a little tidbit, but I do want to say, like, the idea of them doing the Comic-Con coverage was awesome. I recorded this on purpose because I wanted to go back and revisit it. I watched this VHS multiple times. Like, it's a lot of fun. Like, I lived vicariously through their coverage, because there was absolutely no chance at that time that I could go to a convention. And I think that's really just speaks to what G4 was back in the day. In regards to its meaning to geek culture. Geek culture going mainstream is not a problem. That is not the problem. More geeks always want to share their love of whatever it is that they love, whatever franchise it is, whatever thing it is. They love sharing that with more people. More people loving that stuff is more people to talk about the stuff that they love. So it becoming mainstream, more people getting into it, is not a problem. The problem came when it started to become mainstream. It started to become corporatized. And then as it became corporatized, you had a lot of people getting involved in these franchises and in these things that were not fans of these things and wanted to put their own spin on it, their own interpretation of it, their own adaptation of it, and just kind of use the built-in audience to do whatever they wanted without realizing that you are beholden to that existing audience. So really the soul and spark of what geek culture was at this period in time when this documentary is taking place, like in the 2000s, mid 2000s, like that thing that was special about geek culture kind of died as it became more mainstream. Not because more people liked it, but because it just lost its soul. It lost what made it special. That's just my opinion. I didn't want to go on too much of a tangent there. Other than San Diego Comic-Con, they also talk about E3, which is kind of funny because, now it seems like E3 is officially dead, which I find to be somewhat surprising. But they also have coverage or footage of James Cameron visiting Attack of the Show to promote Avatar, which I thought was pretty cool. Lots of really good footage in this documentary. If that's what you're looking for, as I said before, this has it in spades. Then as we get into chapter 3, The Fall, they kick it off with the best thing they could kick it off with, which is Chris Gore falling on his jeans.
Prepare to have wisdom knocked into your brain with a high kick. A high kick.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
Oh, my jeans.
You know what I really love about that clip is Chris constantly plays that clip on the Film Threat live streams. So again, making fun of yourself. Like, oh, look at this old 10-year-old video where I did something dumb. It's funny. Just make fun of yourself. it harkens back to the McHammer thing. And obviously, as they're talking about the fall, they talk about like the things on Attack of the Show that are unacceptable by today's standards. You know, you can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Mainly, they're talking about in regards to sensitivity and its effect on comedy.
Man, we did it once, but now no more. You can't do that no more.
For the most part, I agree with that aspect. I think that since sensitivity is definitely hindering where comedy can go, and that's part of the reason why you really haven't seen a good comedy in several years. For instance, Todd Phillips, who directed the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie, was asked in an interview, and I still remember this because it stands out in my mind. He was basically asked, you know, why he transitioned from comedies to the Joker, because Todd Phillips was well known for doing the Hangover movies. And Todd Phillips said, you know, it's because nobody could take a joke anymore. I don't want to make comedies anymore. And I definitely feel that's how a lot of people feel at this point, and that's not really a good place to be, in my opinion. Now, some of the humor on Attack of the Show was not necessarily my type of humor, but some of the stuff I did think was funny, and I really just liked Attack of the Show because of the stuff that it covered, less so than some of the skits and off-the-wall stuff that they did on the show. That's just my preference, right? And obviously, as you're getting into the fall of Attack of the Show in G4, they obviously talk about Olivia Munn left when she left, and you know, that's pretty much when I stopped watching it. I feel like I stopped watching it just before Olivia Munn left, or probably around the time Olivia Munn left. I wasn't around to see Kevin Pereira leave. He left in 2012. I didn't even have cable or was watching TV at that point. I did not have time for TV that year, really a couple years at that point. So I hadn't really seen any of his exit coverage, and they show the montage video or his exit, you know, stuff from Attack of the Show, and it was kind of cool. Like I said, there's lots of stuff in this documentary that I never saw when Attack of the Show was on, so I think that's really cool. And then obviously, since they're talking about the fall, some of it they talk about things that I find interesting is the more informative stuff, the more like corporate aspects of G4, and they talk about how UFC almost bought G4, and I didn't know that. I thought that was pretty interesting. And then they talk about the Esquire network and all of that stuff, and then they briefly talk about the Cops and Cheaters era of G4. And for anybody still flipping through the channels back then and coming across that, I remember traveling to a hotel one time, and I was like, oh yeah, they got G4, and I changed it to it, and all it was Cops. It was 24 hours of Cops. Like the whole week I was there, anytime I changed it to G4, it was just Cops. Just 24 hours of Cops, nonstop, all day, every day, Cops.
Drop the remote. More Cops coming up next, only on G4.
I mean, I like Cops. I find it pretty entertaining, but it has nothing to do with G4. So Attack of the Show wrapped in January 2013, and I never saw any of the footage that they show here. They show footage from the final episode. And as I said, if you want a big compilation of Attack of the Show, you know, video coverage, this is it. This is the best compilation of Attack of the Show footage that you're probably ever going to see. Now, they do touch on G4's relaunch on November 2021, which I was actually pretty excited about initially when that was announced. The doc really doesn't go into that, and the reason I think they don't really touch on it in this documentary is I don't really think that's the point of the documentary. And honestly, that could be a documentary in and of itself. But what Attack of the Doc is it's really just a retrospective, more positive look at the stuff of what Attack of the Show was, and contrast it, when you're watching it, contrast it with where things are now, like with geek culture, right? And I think that if that was the goal, which I'm pretty sure it was, I think with that being the goal, it definitely succeeds. Now, there were a few things, not really critiques necessarily, but things that I would have liked to see. Like, for instance, I think that having some of the talking heads actually cutting to people being interviewed, like having a talking head segment to kind of cut from, to break up some of the archival footage that they're using. I do think it might have benefited from that, at least from a production standpoint, but I totally understand why they probably, all of the people being interviewed, they only had audio of, if I had to guess, from when this was being filmed, obviously trying to get camera crews in, plus it increases production costs having to send a camera crew in to go record people in their living room like most docs do. So I totally know why it isn't, but I do think it could have benefited a little bit from that. Also, as I mentioned before, the Unreal Engine that they use to kind of fill in some of the stories that are being told, I think it works well enough. However, I think it would have been cool to see something like an 8-bit. For instance, there's a documentary called Console Wars. It's a Paramount Plus documentary. I've watched it several times, and one of the things they do is they use 8-bit. They recreate the stories in 8-bit, and I think something like that probably would have been cool here. I do think that that probably was going to cost more. That would cost more money to make than what they did with using their existing game engine. Also, I think maybe if they just did like a bad skit reenactments, because that's one of the things I really associate with G4. You know, X-Play in particular was the really bad skits that they would have, but Attack of the Show also had them, you know, where they just guerrilla style film stuff out on the street or in cubicles or whatever, just bad skit reenactments. I think that probably would have been pretty funny if they had it in this doc, but again, that would have increased production costs. But regardless, I do think one of those two things probably would have worked better for the documentary. Overall, I really enjoyed this documentary. Even though I just saw it yesterday, I kind of want to go back and watch it already again. If you are a fan of Attack of the Show, this is definitely something I would recommend. If you remember G4, I would recommend it. If you're curious or you want to remember more of how geek culture was at that time, I would recommend it. I think it's a pretty good documentary. It's an indie documentary, so the production value is not, you know, through the roof. But that's kind of what makes it fun, and I think that that's kind of what falls in line with Attack of the Show, to be honest. I mean, Attack of the Show always felt like, you know, and G4 always felt like more independent, you know, people who are getting some corporate money and doing some off-the-wall things with it. And yeah, I think it's really cool. Now, there is a little post-credit scene at the end of the documentary as well, if you sit through the credits, which the credits have a lot of all the backers' names for the Kickstarter on it, which is always nice. I backed another documentary called In Search of Tomorrow, and so anytime you can kind of back some of these independent creators making documentaries, I would definitely recommend it. And I believe they're actually going to do a physical media release of this movie later. I think they're shooting for August, if I remember correctly. So if that's the case, I would be more than happy to buy the physical media and put it on my shelf with my other documentaries, even though I already own it digitally. I don't mind spending a little bit more to support the independent creators and Film Threat and Chris Gore over there, those guys. And honestly, they're supposed to have some special features, so I'm curious as to what those special features are, and hopefully there's a significant amount of special features to justify people like who to buy the digital as well as the physical. And you know, I'm a physical media collector. I talk about it all the time, so I'm all for the physical media release of Attack of the Doc. But what do you guys think? Have you guys seen this documentary already? Do you guys remember G4, Attack of the Show? Do you remember X-Play? They don't talk about X-Play as much in this, but do you remember that? Like, what are some of your fondest memories of watching G4 back in the day? Comment and let me know. I want to thank everybody for watching this video. Thank you, subscribers. All of you are awesome. And if you like this video, please comment, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, or don't. I'm not a beggar. I'm Geek64, and I'll always tell you the truth.